All right, in this video, I'm going to give us some additional tips and clarifications related to writing your abstracts based on some of the questions that have been common from students in the past. So one of the main questions that I get from students is how much detail should be put into the abstract. So I will go over that for some different sections here. So let's first talk about the methods. So when you're giving a description of the methods in your abstract, what I would recommend doing is, first of all, indicating where the samples are from. So I color-coded this here, so that's in purple. So I would give some kind of overview of where the samples are from, so from Europe and the African village of Burkina Faso, for instance. And then for the methods, you also need to give an overview of the types of analyses that were done for these samples. So that's what's indicated in green. In this particular study, they used two general types of analyses, that high throughput 16S sequencing and the biochemical analyses. You don't need to mention a lot of additional details like how the samples were stored or anything like that. Here in the abstract, the methods, you're giving an overall overview, so where the samples are from and the general types of analyses that were used. For the results, let me move my head. For the results, I recommend doing a couple things in this section. First of all, what I have indicated here in red, I recommend giving an overview sentence summarizing the results. So here you might say something like, overall, there were significant differences in the gut microbiome between the two different groups that were examined. And then remember, I just said in the methods, you give the two types of analyses that were done, the 16S sequencing and the biochemical analyses. I then recommend giving 1 to 2 sentences for each of those two main analyses that were discussed in that method sentence you gave. So here in yellow, I have indicating the results of that 16S sequencing. Remember, 16S sequencing is the method that was used to identify what bacteria were present in that gut microbiome in the different groups. So here in yellow, you might talk about which groups were which bacterial groups were more enriched in children from one location versus the other, and vice versa. And then in blue, I have the results of the biochemical analyses. So that biochemical analyses is what was focused on determining whether there were differences in the short-chain fatty acids that are produced by those different bacteria in the children from the different geographic regions. So you might want to say in the results portion of the abstract whether those short-chain fatty acids were more abundant in one group than the other. You can include p-values to support your general claim. So if you look here in this example abstract, I have the p-value is listed, especially to indicate that it was less than 0.05, which means it's indeed significant. So it's supporting the claim that you're making, but you do not need to include the actual statistical tests that were used in the abstract. That's reserved for the methods part of the paper itself. That's not a level of detail that needs to be in the abstract. Some additional general abstract tips that I have for you. When you're thinking about the background and purpose, I recommend having one general background sentence just to describe, for example, what the gut microbiome is and what's been done before, and then one additional sentence here I have shown in blue about the specific purpose of this study. So in this work, we want to compare the gut microbiome of children from different geographic locations. And if we look again, just to point out what's shown here in this background sentence in red, they lay out very clearly what hasn't been done yet. So they say we know that the gut microbial composition depends on different dietary habits, but the association of microbiota with different diets in human populations has not yet been shown. So I always call that a knowledge gap. So they're explicitly saying, we know this, but we do not know this yet. And so that's what we're focusing on for this particular study, is filling in that gap of what we still don't know. Another general tip I have is to make sure that your methods match the result. So what I mean by that is, if you mention the short-chain fatty acid biochemical analysis in the methods, you have to make sure in the results portion of your abstract, you also have some kind of sentence describing the overall results of that analysis. So make sure the methods and the results match. And my last point here is, when you're thinking about the conclusions for this study, remember that this particular paper was a correlation study, so be careful not to overstate your claims. We're going to talk more about this in the next week's module when we talk about analyzing scientific literature. One of the main things to remember when you're reading papers is that correlation does not equal causation. Correlation means you have two different variables and you have identified that they are significantly related to each other, but that does not mean that changes in one variable cause the changes in the other variable. You can only identify that after doing manipulative studies in a lab experiment, for instance. If you're just going out into the field and taking data and observing things in that way, you can identify correlations between two different things, but you can't say for sure that one thing definitively causes the other thing. So when you're reading this paper and thinking about how you want to state your conclusions in the abstract, keep that in mind. This was a correlation study, not a causation one. We do not have a definitive explanation for the cause at this point. We've just identified some potential correlations. So to say that explicitly, we can't say for certain that diet is the cause of the observed differences because of the nature of this particular study. All right, that's all I have. So hopefully that was helpful for you in terms of thinking about what detail to add and some additional tips for you.